Well, we'll persist in our folly. What we're trying to do before we study priority of consciousness in hierarchy, we're trying to study pretty much the source of consciousness. It may be foolhardy or impossible or downright stupid, but we're trying to talk about the nature of God. And that's not very easy, especially when we're trying to do it within mythology. And so we're going to end up with a very patchy, limited type of thing. We're using basically, instead of hierarchy from the bottom up, we're using a top down where we begin with the one or the three attributes of the one, and then are going to work ourselves down closer to our manifest level of existence. What we talked about last time were we told some of the stories of Brahma, and we looked at them primarily as the deepest degree of spiritual freedom, the freedom to create things new, fresh. This time we're going to be talking about Vishnu, and there is only one similarity between the two types of stories, and that is that the stories have common themes, that all the Brahma stories seem to involve incest and seem to involve primal creation, and all of the Vishnu stories also have very common themes. They have a lot of different details about them, and that's where we'll begin to look. We'll begin first by a story from the Rig Veda, and it's very, very short what we have to say, maybe about 6 lines. It's talking about part of the original creation. It says, Vishnu measured apart the earthly realms. Vishnu propped up the upper dwelling, all when he took his 3 wide strides. All creatures dwell in his footsteps. His places are filled with honey, intoxicate in their own elixir. In his dwelling is a fountain of honey, and to be with him there is to be intoxicated with it like the gods. The place of the wide strider is a place of untiring, infinitely productive, many-horned cattle. Pretty poetic for something that ancient. And if you were to read it alone, you would get a notion that the whole idea of creation was usurped from Brahma by Vishnu, and that this would be just another sectarian tract saying that it all began with Vishnu. But if we look a little deeper, we see that yes, there is a creation, and a creation of states and of forms, and they're incidental to the stories of Brahma. If you note that Brahma creates a state and then he leaves it immediately, you might say that in some ways the creation stories of Brahma are very, very empty, and that all of creation is a number of shells that have been discarded by Brahma. Vishnu, at least in the Rig Veda, is not mentioned very much as a creator per se. But the whole threefold universe couldn't come into being without Vishnu. Vishnu represents more of a means or more of a medium of the creation of the universe. Like Brahma, if we're talking about the nature of the divine as it is found in three attributes, and those three attributes are given personages in Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, Brahma represents raw power. And if that raw power took on too many details and took on too much form, it would be subsumed in its own creations. And the raw power or the character of the divine that is represented by Brahma is just a straight out creation. This will be, or this will become. And so in order to reach that deepest level of creativity, that deepest level of freedom, there's a very impersonal type of quality where that attribute of the divine is not itself intimately interacted with the creation. It creates, and that's it. With Vishnu, it is very, very different. Vishnu is in the process. Vishnu is, if you look at this really carefully, he measures the universe. He props up the heavens. He paces out the different realms, and in his footsteps all of the different creatures and beings live. So this is a much more intimate interaction and association with creation. So the whole idea is here that Vishnu, or the creative activity, is internal to the process of the subdividing of the realms. We're going to see a lot more about this, much more, in a little bit. But Vishnu then represents that which organizes the creation. And that organization is done by a word. And this is a word that in its continuous onrush of life, in its continuous fruitfulness, is making possible the different realms and the different forms for the creation to go on. It doesn't just say be, it actually organizes the stuff for being. In this sense, the notion of Vishnu is very much like the Greek, the Orphic notion of a nous. And this nous is a divine intelligence, and it is a breath-like word out of which everything comes into being. Now, even though this is intelligence, this is not an intelligence that is mental. If we're trying to understand the nature of the divine, or of spiritual being, or of God, it is not enough to say that this intelligence is mental, because God is not a mentalist in the sense that we think of someone who is thoughtful and concentrated and, how would you say it, almost tense in creation. This is much more a kind of wisdom. The character, as it's described here, his dwelling is a fountain of honey, and to be with him is to be intoxicated with it like the gods. This is a very cohesive quality of feeling. In all mythologies that have been brought forth by mystics of all ages and all ilks has been power or will. The second has always been wisdom or feeling. That is to say, the thing that holds people together in a common sense, like even such a thing as a football team or an orchestra, the thing that makes for real binding among people is the very thing that makes for binding for a continuous type of wisdom, and that is feeling. That if one is trying to communicate and to be in touch with people, to manifest the will is never a wise thing, because will isolates. It makes one singular, it separates, and one gets into demonstrations of power, and that has that very empty quality, like the quality of the first, at least as it's intellectually described. It's not meaning to say that there isn't feeling in the first as well as in the second, but the attributive character of the second is feeling. So that the more people can feel you, the more they can communicate with you, the closer they will be. And this is to say then that the means whereby the cosmos is organized and brought into potential or into the stuff out of which things are made is done by feeling. Feeling holds it all together, and the unity of the one in three, the unity of the one in three is a feeling. And this feeling comes through as a quality of wisdom. This is the quality like of a divine love that holds all together, and this is why the attribute of this kind of consciousness is seen as a fountain of honey. I don't know about bathing in it, but I think that the allegory is well taken. In some regards, like, for example, in the Christian terminology, the Christ is referred to as a rock. And for a being of love, that seems very, like a very hard thing. But I think what is being pointed to in that image is the density of being. Not the density of form, but the density of being. And that density of being is like saying that this is an unshatterable or an inseparable kind of love that holds things together. And the image of honey is like an image of like a golden light. And that golden light is sweet, and it's filled with love, and the cohesive quality of that is what we're trying to get to with Vishnu. We're trying to say then that the nature of the divine is not only singular and powerful, but that it is held together, and that in the simple way that it is sometimes said God is love, we're saying that the divine has a very rubbery, plastic kind of unity that flows, and it's light, and it's transparent like honey, and it's sweet like honey. The cohesive feeling is itself a formless form out of which all form proceeds. This is another character that we run into with the second attribute of the divine in all mythologies and in all stories, the element of paradox. And it's a paradox where all forms come from one form, but that one form is formless and it produces formability. Vishnu has as one of his names or one of his appellations, it is called Vishnu, the form of everything. And if you try to think of every object or every thing that exists in the cosmos all being of one form, you recognize that the form of everything must itself be not specifically one form, but capable of bearing all forms. So in this, we come back to a concept that we've looked at before. We mentioned it a little bit sometimes last year. We see this as a proto-imagination. The will of itself alone would be disintegrating. But the love feeling quality is a feeling of cohesion, and that cohesion is so indistinct and it is so rare that and so indefinite that it is the capability of imagining any form. This is a really profound state. This is something that artists get at in one way. It is like the concept of negative imagination is the true imagination. And people have come to mystical experiences and enlightenments by it, by taking any object, even the simplest kind of object, and looking at it and realizing that anything like a book like this will define the entire universe. That if you look at a thing from enough points of view and you see that as a reality, you can see that the universe is everything that is not this book as well as this book. And when you shift your consciousness from the concrete focus on a thing to everything that is not that thing, you can't hold in your mind everything that is not this book, because it is an irrational thing. But you leave go of a very strong dependency upon an individual form, and in that moment you get a sense, or you get an experience of the infinite imagination or proto-imagination out of which all imaginings come. So that's a really, it's really hard to try and talk about God, but to conceive of something, there is a passage in the Bible that says the ways of God are strange to the ways of men. And to experience things in the state of a universal source rather than in specific forms is an exceedingly difficult thing to do, because we usually try to do that mentally, but realizing that such a thing exists and putting our attention to it, it makes it possible. So it's a rich, sweet, dense light of life, and it's like a honey, and it has the productivity of cattle. Vishnu is always associated with cattle, though it is not one of his vehicles. Vishnu is said in this myth, or in the story that we just told, to be masculine. But like all of the divine characteristics, the divine is best seen as it. And it is capable of being masculine, and it is capable of being feminine, and it is capable of taking on other dimensions of creativity in terms of gender. But usually the convention that has been taken relative to human bodies, and that human bodies, the polarity of the masculine body in the physical world is positive. And therefore there is an activity about us when we are in male physical human bodies, and that activity of active manifest existence is called masculine. So when we're talking about Vishnu, Vishnu could be both masculine or feminine, but in the manifest sense, rather than in the unmanifest, which would be during the great sleeps of the divine, everything would be feminine then. But in the manifest state, things become masculine. But relative to Brahma, Vishnu is feminine, because the imagination is a womb. It is as, how would you say it? It is as impressionable and as giving as the will is dominating and asserting. So that if something is to be an imagination without holding any form, and because its divinity would be lost, it would no longer be immortal if a form were held, it would be dying. And in order for that imagination to stay alive, it has to be infinitely rare. And in that infinite rareness, it is perpetually alive. And that rareness is what gives its receptive capability. And even though it is as rare as a word that you hear now, and it strikes you, and then 15 minutes later you forget all about it, the imagination, or the word that is the second attribute of the divine, Vishnu, is like that nature. So it is a womb of imagination, and it is feminine, and it is very sympathetic, and it is nurturing, and it pours out that love unto itself and all of the forms that are born of it in such a way that it is intoxicating. In some sense, and in even some of the very ancient myths, Vishnu might be what would be called the daughter, wife, and mother of Brahma, or Brahma Prajapati. Vishnu is clearly seen as, by some of the Vaisvas, who are the followers of Vishnu, I get sectarian about it, I guess, is seen by them as the child, the daughter of Prajapati, because this is the daughter that receives the direct linear projections, the gigantic phallus of Brahma into its being. In other senses, it's very profound, the Hindu mythology. In some senses, Vishnu is called Narayana. And Narayana is pictured in the myths as lying on a lotus which is being floated by a seven-headed serpent, and sometimes it's at the bottom of the ocean of milk, and sometimes it's floating on the ocean of milk. But out of Narayana's navel comes a umbilical cord, and that umbilical cord turns into another lotus, and on that lotus, four-headed Brahma is sitting and meditating. And so the ancient Hindus knew very well that the first two are contemporal and conspatial with each other, and they are interdependent on each other. It's not always clear. It's very much like the dynamics of a male-female relationship. It's not clear whether it is the demanding quality of the masculine that causes things to happen, or whether it is the more indirect drawing quality of the feminine that draws the masculine out, whether it is what brings things into being. And so in Vishnu, we see that the character is not only cares for its creations, but the divine character, the imagination, has to create. And it has a very drawing quality. and it draws out from within itself the power to create. Because when you're looking at divine things, which we're doing in a really limited way, you can't look at them only one way. You can't say only that the second principle of the divine is receptive, and in that infinite receptivity it takes from the first and produces the possibility of forms, and then out of that forms precipitate. It is not merely receptive, it itself draws. And it's like saying, I have this in me that I must create, and so it works both directions, and it does so simultaneously. Everything that exists in the divine exists now. It's there all the time, and it's a much different kind of consciousness to be able to understand that. It's almost it's strange that it's confusing and lucid at the same time. Everything becomes clear, but everything is confused, especially when you start to begin to expatiate on it. All right. We expatiated a little long there on 8 lines. Spatial. They share the same time and they share the same space. That they're inseparable in either potential of their being, though they are synonymous with their potential of being and the states that become in them. There still is a difference. I don't want to get into it because it's on the fly. I don't know that I can talk about too many rare transcendental things. Okay. Maybe more than I do. All right. The second story we have to tell is from the Satapatha Brahmana. The gods and the demons, both born of Prajapati, were striving against each other. And the demons seemed to be prevailing. And they thought to themselves, all this world is ours. They said, let us divide the earth, and when it is divided, let us live upon it. They set out to divide the whole world, which is much bigger than just the physical plane, with ox hides. In short, they were trying to polarize it from east to west throughout the cosmic creation. They were trying to divide the earth with ox hides. And the gods heard about it, and they held a little conference, and they said, the demons are dividing up this earth. And rather than struggle too hard, they said, let's go there. For who would we be if we didn't share in the division? In fact, they're letting the demons control to a certain extent. And they placed Vishnu, the sacrifice. This is another appellation of the name of Vishnu, is the sacrifice. In fact, Vishnu is sacrifice. They placed Vishnu, the sacrifice, as a dwarf, a little tiny dwarf. They placed him as their head and as their leader. And they said to the demons, let us share, and let a portion be ours. And the demons were jealous of their division, and they said, as much of the earth as Vishnu lies upon, so much will we give to you. And they were captured in their folly, because if they're here, we'll give them this little patch, Like somewhere I own 1 square inch of Alaska from a from when I was a child, and I think it was a Wheaties box or something like that, that if you sent in a certificate from out of the cereal box, you got 1 square inch of Alaska, which might have gold in it, or maybe it was a gold mine or something like that. And then this is the way the demons figured. And the gods said, they have given us much, for they have given us a space as large as the sacrifice. And it comes out now that what we were talking about last week, remember when Prajapati spoke and what came out was Agni, a burning fire, and Agni was nothing but a mouth. And then everything was created in a whirling spinning by Prajapati, and that was the sacrifice, and that is one and the same as Vishnu. And so what they did is they put Vishnu down, and they enclosed him with Vedic meters. That is to say, they went on the south side of him, and they said with the Gayatri meter, I enclose you. And on the west side, they said, with the Trastubha meter, I enclose you. And on the north side, they said, with the Jagati meter, I enclose you. And on the east side, they put the fire of Agni. And what happened is Vishnu was surrounded then by the meter of poetry, or by the meter of poetry as, these are really interesting stories that they have, that was activated or brought into force by the fire of Agni. And they went on worshipping him. All of the gods worshipped Vishnu to exhaustion. And when they did so, Vishnu expanded to the entire universe. And who knows of this expansion that comes by sacrifice gains the whole world away from his enemies and excludes everyone from a share. This is very Taoistic thought. You know, the Taoists have this claim that to win the whole world, you must lose it. Almost exactly the words of Christ. And now we're seeing a little bit of the psychology of the second attribute. The psychology of it works that by giving up all things in sacrifice, you have all things. And so there is not only a love feeling, and not only a great receptivity and a drawing quality, but there is this infinite sacrifice of selfness, this infinite giving up of all things, and because of that, everything is obtained. The consequence of all of this is that from all of his expansion and from all of the words spoken to Vishnu, he was exhausted. And the form that he was in as a dwarf, he couldn't get out of because it was surrounded by the meter on all sides. And so what he did is he dove down into the roots of the plants. And the gods at this point, this is a long story, but we're going to truncate it. And the gods at this point said, where has Vishnu gone? And they said, surrounded by the meter and Agni, he couldn't have escaped. So we'll have to search here for him. And they dug down 3 fingers deep, and they found him there, or began to find him there. And from there on in, they said, always let the altar of sacrifice be 3 fingers high. This is, I won't pretend that I can interpret this myth in any which way, because there's just so much that is in this in potential. But it brings out, again, at first it was in the Rig Veda, it was 3 steps that Vishnu took in divine the universe. Here it is by going 3 fingers within the body of the earth that is himself. As the altar of sacrifice, he has the whole earth. I think this is really a direct allusion to the altar of sacrifice being 3, fingers are pointers of intelligence, and that the 3 characteristics and attributes of the divine are what are talked about by the 3. But let's go talk about the number 2, because we're talking about the second, and we obviously have in the second a number of division. Just as the second is the wife-daughter, so the number 2 gives you the possibility of 2 twos. Once you have taken the unity and divided in 2, you can have 2 twos. Then you can have 2 twos. And it goes on, and you can carry that on. Hence, it is a division to the whole earth. The 2 that is Vishnu is a paradox because it is both a dwarf and the whole universe at the same time. Now, in one way, the character of Vishnu capable of expanding to great rarity and getting within things so that he can't be seen and that you have to dig down to get to that consciousness, and Vishnu as being a dwarf that looks so innocent that even the treacherous demons are not intimidated by him. That shows the character of the paradoxical nature of the second attribute. In the same way that it is as dense as a rock or as dense as honey, it's as rare as the will that does nothing but will is subtle. So it is a sacrifice that is within imagination, and its sacrifice is itself as the whole single child universe. This is a concept that is seen in Christian mysticism as the alone begotten, which in some cases is called, because it was begotten alone, and it is sometimes called the only begotten because it maintains the unity of the divine, which is in itself inseparable and can only be one. And so the manifest egg of imagination then is like the alone begotten, or it is a sacrifice that is at one in itself. The character of the demons, we should talk a little bit about the demons. The demons are created before the gods. And the demons represent a twilight state between the light of intelligence of the divine and the black darkness of the ignorance or the unknown. The demons always dwell in the shadow and always dwell in the dark, and they represent the dark side, you might say, of the second itself. In the same way that the second itself is a light, receptive imagination, the quality of the demons are the unknown that has a curiosity that pulls us in. However, because that ignorance, in order to be understood, has to be objectified, there is a quality about the demons that is possessive. And that objectivity of the demons has this quality of holding the gods and constantly fighting the gods for possession of the cosmos. They're trying to steal away, you might say, the light of intelligence for themselves. They form the necessary resistance, and in the interplay between the demons and the gods, the interplay between darkness and light, is where there is an ever-constant expansion of the light of an intelligence. This is something that pervades all mystical outlooks of the cosmos, and especially it is directly expressed the further we go back into East Aryan mythology. Already we find the great dichotomy of the darkness and the light in Persian mythology, but when we go deeper back into Hinduism and the early Hindu myths, this prevalence of the demons of darkness versus the light of intelligence is very much present there already. So the demons then represent the necessary resistance, or they represent the buffer state, the becoming of the new intelligence of the divine. But it is a struggle, and it is an all-out struggle, and the only way that all-out struggle, so that one doesn't lose oneself to ignorance, the only way that can be done is impersonally. And this is why the nature of spirit, which is what we're trying to get at in these stories, the nature of spirit, the nature of divine is impersonal. God is not a respecter of persons. And when there is this impersonal giving of self, that is the only way that it is possible to look at the new in the forms of darkness manifest as the demons without being given over or lost to it. It's as if to say that as soon as we become personal, or the moment we take the interpretation of something as personal, we have lost to the darkness. And our divinity is then spent in the forms of the demons, or spent in the realm of darkness, and it is lost to us only to be redeemed later, potentially. Okay, so you get what I'm trying to get at, that how does, again, Taoism say it? It makes it all easy. It does everything while giving the impression of doing nothing. That this great intensity has no internal friction, has no internal resistance, and it can give itself with great intensity because of its impersonality, and that is the way the demons are overcome. And that literally is the attitude of sacrifice. So the more that, remember the second attribute of the divine wins by losing. And the more that it sacrifices itself, the more that it gives itself over, the more it finds in itself the wisdom of being. All right, I guess that's so we find then that the nature of Vishnu is the nature of a savior. The second attribute, or the divine, is a savior, and it is a savior of itself. It is a redeemer. It redeems everything that flows out from itself within itself, and it is a sacrificer. It is a purposeful giver. So I don't know how to say it. To understand the nature of the divine, one cannot think expediently, because expediency has to do with the ends that we have as earthly beings. But if we understand the intent and purpose of things, that is what brings us to the divine. And the more that we in our consciousness ask ourselves questions like, what is the divine purpose of this, and listen in a universal sense, the more we ourselves become divine. So we see the very great power of sacrifice, and it's really, really interesting to see that this is, again, an all-out sacrifice. That the gods worship to exhaustion, and Vishnu receives and expands to exhaustion. Now, this is a really powerful image, because normally when we think of the creative word as manifest from the divine creator, we think of a force speaking out. This story shows the inverse of that. In the same way that the physical representation of the divine that we see daily, the sun radiates out to the planets and to the whole womb of the zodiac of our little cosmos here. At the same way, there is a radiating in of all of the gods. There is a stupendous sacrifice here, and this is really ironic, the paradox, that the word is not only spoken into existence, the word is listened and heard into existence. And that is to say, there is a constant flow that emanates from all points, not just the sun, but the sun is all over, emanating in all points outward. But the sacrifice or the worship of the altar is being spoken into the word, and the word hears itself into existence. And we're talking about something that I don't know that it's even possible or legal or right to do, but I think in the deepest state of meditation, in trying to approach the second, one hears and speaks at the same time, and that they're part of the same instant, and the realization, not just in the power that's coming out from the first, but what brings it into existence in such a way that it becomes manifest, is both at the same time. And that to focus on one or the other is to miss the whole nature of the divine. So that maybe I should sit down and listen for the second half, and it would be a better talk. The next little story is from the Vayu Purana. We'll go a little faster now. In the 7th or Treta age, Bali, who was chief of the demons, I then occupied the whole triple world. The triple world was earth, or all the manifest planes, and heaven, or all of the heavenly spiritual worlds, and there was a sky, as sort of a neutral, insulating realm in between the two of them. This is interesting. I'd like to go into it, but I don't think it would be wise. Maybe sometime I would like to do some talks on cosmography, or mythography, where the different places are, like the Sumerian darkness or the Rainbow Bridge and such like that. At this time, Vishnu appeared or was reborn as a dwarf avatar Brahman in the family of Aditi. Now, these are all words that are names that are involved in a very deep and complex metaphysics, which we're not going to go into because it's just a storytelling class. And I don't know that I have that kind of erudition that I could begin to do it in the first place. At an auspicious time, the demons were very self-sacrificing, and they were pridefully celebrating their having taken over the whole triple world, and they were performing a sacrifice. And the dwarf Brahmin comes up to Bali and he says, "You are king of the triple world. In you everything is firmly placed. O king, you should give me the space covered in 3 strides." And this is all of the Hindu mythology is exceedingly repetitious, but each time the stories are told over, they're told with a different slant on them, and you get a different insight into them. And Bali was pretty self-satisfied, and he says, "I grant this thing," because he thought it was just a pittance. Vishnu then took 3 strides, and he encompassed the entire earth, the entire sky, and the heavens, the entire universe. And then, when he had occupied everything, he shone forth in his true being, illuminating all the worlds and taking away the prosperity of all the demons. Bali and his 3 lieutenants, Namuchi, which means something like drought, Sambara, and Prahlada, the joy of excitement, and their entire relations, they were all bound up and they were taken to some kind of a place, some kind of a hell, and they were scattered in all directions. In short, that the light brought an end to them. Then Vishnu revealed himself as Madhava, which is the individual world soul, as the essence of all the elements, of all time, and all of its parts, to the wonder of all of the Brahmins. All of the gods then, and all of the demons, and all of the humans, and all of the creatures were then stunned or bewitched by the wonder of the light of Vishnu. And at this time, Vishnu retired and he gave kingship of all of the immortals to Indra. Quite a fascinating story. Again, it's much too big for what we're wanting to do. We got about 3 more things we're going to go through yet tonight. This might be a 2-tape night. We see again the whole principle of expansion and contraction, the whole principle of inversion, and we see the duality of light and darkness. And we see Vishnu primarily as the light of creation. And it is we see the light or the unity of light being born out of the struggle between light and darkness, wherein darkness gives itself over to the light. And all of the separativeness and all of the ignorance and all of the selfishness of darkness is taken into light, and it acts something like a fuel to the light. What we're seeing in this very little story is like almost an entire creation, or like the entire second half of the creation, when all of the manifestations and the forms of the world have been populated by the demons, that is to say, all of the ramifications of unity as it impresses itself into the unknown and takes this whole hierarchy or stratification of different forms in bifurcation, trifurcation, septification, that's what it would be in Sanskrit or something of that order. And eventually those forms give in or almost need a unity to communicate among themselves. And it's like saying that the extremity of the creation, when it has carried as far as it can into the realms of darkness, including this kind of realm that we exist in matter, where there are so many divisions and subdivisions, even more subdivisions than the physicists can imagine, when it has gone that far, there is an overconfidence in the demi-consciousness or the dark consciousness in the unknown of matter that sacrifices to the light. And once it does that, everything is unified and absorbed in itself, in it. Oh boy. We see not only the order of the universe in this story, but we see the whole concept of a avatara. The Vishnu is perpetually reborn, not only in spirit, but in various different forms to redeem things. This is the Redeemer, and this birth as the dwarf Brahmin is to return the attention to the unity of all things. And this, I don't know how to say it, the form or the character that is the intelligence that is called the second attribute, which in our case is personified in the divinity Vishnu, there is in all of this unity an integral structure. And that character is an infinite purpose. And that infinite purpose and that infinite order, or that word that both speaks and listens itself at the same time, is understood as the purpose of existence. A unified purpose that is light. Among the Hindus, that is called Dharma. It is called the divine purpose of all things. And when the light has been extended into all of its forms, then it returns back to itself, and all of those forms go back to that oneness of the imagination which was never lost, and its character as a purpose behind it. You know, if you go and look at a statue, or if you look at a painting, you see that it has a character. Especially if you look at a really good sculptor, you look at a piece of sculpture and you feel what the lines are saying. If you take the form of all forms and understand that same feelability or of coming to know the unified purpose of things, that is sort of like what the Dharma is like. The purpose of existence has a character that's all its own. I don't know how to say it. I think I'm too far out on a really thin area, and I don't want to go any further. But we see it here as a unifying wisdom, and that it has a purpose, and it tries to bring all things to one end. Now, we've talked in a very gross way about the god Vishnu. And we've talked very vaguely, very abstractly about the character of imagination or the nature of purpose or what this all feels like. To tie it all together is what this little story does, because when Vishnu reveals himself, he reveals himself as the soul of the universe, which is like the selfness of us. I was just speaking with a friend last night who has a serious illness, and she is exceedingly introverted and lives withdrawn in her consciousness a lot, and she doesn't feel ill. She says, I don't know how I have a serious illness. I don't feel ill. Because her attention is on the unity and the continuity of consciousness that pervades all time, all the space of her existence, and what happens in her life day by day. And it isn't until there's an exceedingly great pain or the consciousness is cut off so it can't know itself that there would be a realization that there is a great illness. You see what I'm trying to say? There is something that when we are introverted and turned in on ourselves, we recognize that as a continuous reality. And we recognize that even though we may have many very contradictory facets to our character, and we might give ourselves to all kinds of wise and unwise pursuits and become each of those things, we also realize that there is a self that stays with them all. That is our experience in a very minimal way of our selfhood. But if we take the essence of that selfhood and realize that that is just an idea of an individual focus of something that is in all beings, in all being, the selfness that belongs to the entire cosmos and that is very much awake but is not self-conscious because it gives that up impersonally. It has all of the qualities of selfhood without having a separated self. That selfness is what the second attribute of the divine is like. And in this story, the redeeming light is something that we can relate to by knowing ourselves and the continuity of our being. If we can rise beyond that and see how that is an expression of something that we can't take individually and certainly cannot take personally, that is the experience of the reality of the divine that is purified of selfhood in selfness. That is the character of the divine from which all the structure of being comes. Okay. I guess I don't want to talk about the binding tension of manifest consciousness and things like that because it's carrying things a little too far. I want to read a couple of stories and comment on them. And these are from some of the classical incarnations of Vishnu. The first is from the Satapatha Brahmana again. In the morning they brought Manu water for ablutions. Now Manu is a man who was something like an early king, a very early divine king, that after being king and retiring, he lived a holy life. And you're going to find he's very much of a parallel to something that takes place in the myths of the Bible. Just as they in the morning they brought Manu water for ablutions, just as they bring it for washing the hands. As he was washing, a fish came into his hands and said, "Care for me, and I will save you." "From what will you save me?" "A flood will carry away all these creatures. I will save you from it." "How should you be cared for?" "As long as we are tiny," said the fish, "our destruction is great, for fish swallows fish. Care for me at first in a pot, and when I outgrow it, dig a trench and care for me in it. And when I outgrow that, take me down to the ocean, for then I will be beyond destruction." The fish grew steadily into a jasa, for that grows largest. It said, "In a certain year the flood will come. Then you will build a ship and come to me. And when the flood has risen, you will enter the ship, and I will save you from the flood." Manu cared for it in this way and carried it down to the ocean. And in the very year when the fish had indicated, he built the ship and came to him. And when the flood had risen, he entered the ship. The fish swam up to him, and he fastened the rope of the ship to the horn of the fish, and with it he sailed through to the northern mountain. "I have saved you," said the fish. "Fasten the ship to a tree, but do not let the water cut you off when you are on the mountain. As the water subsides, keep following it down." He kept following it down in this way, so that the slope of the northern mountain is known as Manu's descent. The flood swept away all other creatures, and Manu alone remained here. Interesting story. Later on in the Puranas, the same story is told in another way. How much time do we have? In times past, a king named Manu, the child of the sun, practiced extensive asceticism and patently handed his kingdom over to his son. Endowed with all the qualities of the soul, equally indifferent to joy and sorrow, the hero achieved the highest yoga in a solitary place on the Malay mountain range. When 1,000,000 years had passed, Brahma, who sits on a lotus, was pleased and came to give him a boon, saying, "Choose a boon." The king bowed to the grandfather and said, "There is only one unsurpassed boon that I wish from you. Let me be able to protect the multitude of all beings moving and still when the dissolution takes place." The soul of all agreed to this and vanished. Then a great rain of flowers fell from the sky sent by the gods. One day, as he was performing in his hermitage the libation which delights the ancestors, a sapphire fish came into his hands along with the water. Notice this story, it's a different kind of a fish. When the king, who was full of compassion, saw the fish, he took care to protect it in a vessel of water for a day and a night, until it had the form of a fish 16 fingers long. Then it cried, "Save me, save me." And he threw the water creature into a jar, and even within that jar it grew to 3 hands during one night. Again the fish said to the son of the 1,000-rayed god in a wail of distress, "Save me, save me. I have come to you for refuge." Then the child of the sun threw the fish into a well, And when the fish could no longer fit even into that well, he threw it into a vast lake. But it grew still to the width of a league, and again it cried out in distress, save me, O best of kings. Then Manu threw it into the Ganges, and when it continued to grow, the Lord of the earth threw it into the ocean. But when the fish had pervaded the whole ocean, Manu became frightened and said, Who are you, a lord of demons? Or are you Vasudeva, another name for Vishnu? Who else could be like this? Whose body could be equal to 20,000 leagues? I have recognized you in fish form, Kesava, but you are wearing me out. Homage to you, Hare Krishna, Lord of the universe, dwelling place of the universe. Then the Lord Vishnu, who excites men, and who had taken the form of a fish, said, Bravo, bravo, you have recognized me rightly, and faultlessly kept your vow. In a short time the earth will be submerged with all its mountains and trees and houses. This boat has been fashioned out of the assemblage of all the gods in order to protect the assemblage of great living souls. Those born of sweat, those born of eggs or of water, and those living creatures which slew their skins, place them all in this boat and save them, for they have no protector. And when your ship is struck by the winds that blow at the end of the age, fasten the ship to this horn of mine, O King, Lord of kings, Lord of the earth. At the end of the dissolution you will be the Prajapati of the whole universe, moving and still. Thus at the beginning of the Krita age you will be the omniscient, firm king, the overlord of the period of Manu, worshipped even by the gods. This, by the way, is where our word man comes from, or man. Then Manu asked the chastiser of Madhu, O Lord, for how many years will the interval of destruction last, and how shall I protect the creatures, O Lord, chastiser of Madhu? And how shall I be united with you again? The fish replied, From tomorrow there will be a drought upon the earth that will last for 100 years, when food will be scarce and misfortune rife. Then 7 cruel rays will destroy those creatures still left, and 7 times 7 rays will rain down hot coals. The fire of the submarine mare will be transformed at the end of the age. We'll talk about the submarine mare next time. Maybe it's and a poisonous fire will shoot forth from her mouth out of hell, and a fire will rise from the third eye of the forehead of Bhava, which is another name for Shiva, burning and agitating the triple universe, great sage. And when the whole earth has thus burned to ashes, the sky will be heated by steam. Then the universe with its gods and constellations will be totally destroyed. 7 clouds of doomsday, whirlpool, frightening roar, bucket, fierce, crane, lightning banner, and blood red, these clouds, born of the sweat of Agni, will flood the earth, the oceans will be stirred, and will all come together, and all of the 3 universes will be a single ocean. Then take this boat of the Vedas, place the essences and seeds of all living creatures upon it, and by attaching the rope as I have taught you, fasten the boat to my horn, and you will be protected by my majesty. You alone will remain when even the gods have been burned. The moon and the sun, Brahma and I, together with the 4 world protectors, the holy river Narmada, the great sage Markandeya, Bhava, the Vedas and Puranas and subsidiary sciences, all of these will remain with you during the interval of destruction of the era of Manu Hatasu, when all is a single ocean. I will proclaim the Vedas to you at the beginning of creation, O Lord of earth, heater of enemies. Then the Lord vanished, and Manu practiced the rope technique that Vasudeva had favored him with, and practiced it until the final flood occurred as it had been foretold. And when the time arrived, as has been foretold from the mouth of Vasudeva, Vishnu, the exciter of men, appeared in the form of a horned fish, and a serpent in the form of a rope came to Manu's side. Then the sage who knew Dharma gathered together all creatures and placed them on the boat, and by the technique of attachment, he tied the boat to the horn of the fish with a rope that was a serpent. He approached Vishnu the Exciter upon it and prostrated himself before him. That's a pretty wild story. Almost too much. In fact, it is too much. Again, we see the whole principle of expansion. Only in this case, we see it in a different form. We see it staged. We see Vishnu beginning as a guppy. Actually, it was actually something like a goldfish. And that is what is true of goldfish. You know that. Goldfish take their size according to the body of water that they are in. And so that if you take a little goldfish out of a bowl that you have, you put it in a pond, it becomes big like a carp. Actually, a goldfish is in the carp family. And so the details of the story, as told by the Hindus, are actually quite accurate. But here we find the second. Remember, we said when there were two, there was the possibility of two twos, and then there was the possibility of two tutus, parentheses inserted, and thus and so on. That represents a growing kind of proportion. And proportion is another name for Dharma. Dharma is the ninth house in Hindu astrology, which is the house of religious purpose in Western astrology. And this whole idea of a sense of proportion, which is an invisible, abstract principle that allows growth upon itself, is a principle of the two. And that is a thing that is common to Vishnu, that whether it is 3 strides or whether it is growing from a fingerling to a 20,000 league sea beast, Vishnu grows by stages. And so this is like saying that the secret of beauty, because beauty comes from the love-wisdom principle of the imagination, and that to understand the second within ourselves is to have the sense of beauty, to understand what is beautiful about all forms by looking like at a Rodin statue. And in that same sense of the proportional growing, the fish avatar of Vishnu grows by stages, and this is all internal to the whole of it. We see the whole idea again of the cosmos both as the rare extent of manifest being of the imagination and intelligence as love, but we also see it concentrated as a germ. So like the whole idea, like the idea that is now in the Big Bang Theory, that everything, all of the matter of the entire universe started in something smaller than than what we consider a single atom to take now, that whole concept of the second principle, which is the principle of space, as opposed to the principle of time of the Father, that principle of space is the large and the small all at the same time. I got too greedy this time. I'm sorry. I got into too many things. So it is seeing the second as all of those things. What also happens here is when you have two, and when you have the paradox of the large and the small, you have the concept of something that repeatedly happens again. And so like you have the pulsating quality of the large and the small, of the repeatedly condensing and then expanding again. Again, we have the whole story of the second attribute as the Redeemer. Nothing is ever lost. All of the imaginations that are shouted out are called back, and it comes in quite a dramatic case, at least in the second instance of the story. And it shows this as taking place within a continuum. Now, it's really interesting here. The whole idea of what we call dog eat dog, the Hindus call fish eats fish, which is actually a much more true to nature image. And that image of fish eats fish is an image to them that the abstract or ideational nature of chaos is described by. Because at the same time that fish grow, there's a consuming again. That when things are redeemed, they are consumed. And things are eaten so that all the little minutiae that are in this detailed chaos that we are existing in now, to them, this is chaos. And the consumption of all of these details is what causes the expansion of the cosmos. Because the cosmos contracts more and more as it condenses into the material realms. And then as there is the dissolution of the cosmos, there is the consumption of detail and the expansion of being. So this is again quite a cosmological thing. But this is very, very interesting because scientists living in the last 10 years think that they are the originators of the notion of chaos being at the height of complexity of manifestation. That things become so chaotic that you can form order among them. And that all of the details and, this is what happens with science. They have separated, the material scientists have separated disciplines within disciplines within disciplines so that to have a Renaissance person that can understand all disciplines is no longer possible. But within all of this complexity, they have now come up with a chaos theory, and they claim that the concentration of complexity leads to a cosmos from a manifest chaos, which is just the opposite of the Babylonian chaos, because for the Babylonian chaos, it's a rare chaotic nothingness that is sort of all strung together, and out of that is where the concrete manifestation is born. And in Vishnu, both forms of chaos are born at the same time. All right, I got carried away on that, and that's where the notes started going awry. I don't know how to say it. Our own notions of protection are don't look so pretty here. Yes, the Redeemer is seen as a protector, but paradoxically, the protector has all of these things. It lets loose Shiva, which destroys everything. And I wanted to talk just a little bit. I'll mention it as something that makes a lovely visual kind of meditation to work on. At the same time that Vishnu, as the fish and as the cosmos, is expanded by eating up all of the details, going the other direction, the preservation of the experience of all of the forms that have been, goes the other way by concentrating into deeper and deeper little germs. Because it's really clear in here that this is not a ship that we think of like a boat, because the germs of everything that lives or that has ever been formed are what are saved. I won't go into the snake and the rope tricks or anything like that, because that would be going too far afield. Read one more little story, and then I have some other little things I want to go into. This is another one of the incarnations. This is a creative avatar. This is the boar avatar of Krishna instead of the fish avatar. This is from the Vishnu Purana. When the interval between aeons was past, the Lord Brahma, endowed with the quality of goodness, arose from his night's sleep and saw the world was empty. The supreme Narayana, incomprehensible, the Lord of all others, the Lord without being, the source of everything, he who has the very form of Brahma, he is called Narayana, for the reason explained in this verse about the God who has the very form of Brahma and is the beginning and end of the universe. The waters are called Narya, for the waters are the offspring of the man Nara, and they were formerly his abode, Ayana. Therefore he is known as Narayana. Realizing that the earth was within the waters when the universe had been made into a single ocean, Prajapati wished to raise it. He made another body. As at the beginning of the previous aeons he had made the fish, the tortoise, and others, so now the eternal, constant, supreme soul of the universe, Prajapati, took the body of a boar, a form composed of the Vedic sacrifice, in order to preserve the whole universe. He who is the supporter of the earth, the support of the soul, was praised by Sankha and the other cities who had gone to the world of men, and he entered the water. When the goddess Earth saw that he had entered the subterranean region of hell, she bowed to him in humble devotion, and she praised him. While the blessed supporter of the earth was being praised by the earth in this way, he murmured a resonant, low, growl-like chanting of the Samaveda. Then the great boar, whose eyes were like full-blown lotuses and whose body as dark and smooth as blue lotus petals, resembled the dark blue mountain, lifted up the earth from the regions of hell on his own tusk. As he rose up, the water that had touched him was driven by the wind from his mouth and washed Sanda and the other shining sages who had taken refuge in the world of men, so that they were purified of their sins. The roaring waters rushed down into hell, which had been torn open by the tips of his hooves, and the winds of his breath scattered all about the siddhas who dwelt in the world of men. As the great boar arose, holding the earth, his belly dripping with water, shaking his great body that was made of the Vedas, the sages who had gone between his bristles praised him. As the supreme soul, supporter of the earth, was praised in his way, he lifted up the earth quickly and placed her upon the great ocean. The earth stayed like a great ship on top of the flood of water and did not sink, because her body was so spread out. Then when he had made the earth level, the Lord who has no beginning, the highest Lord, piled up mountains on the earth in order to divide it. By means of his power, which is never in vain, he whose wish is never in vain created on the surface of the earth all those mountains which had been burnt in the previous creation. He divided the earth into 7 continents as it had been, and he divided the 4 worlds, earth and others, as before. Again, there is too much to go into, but again, the same kinds of themes. In this case, it is a savior by bringing things into imagination, into manifestation through the imagination, rather than taking things out of manifestation, as in the Manu story. The boar, as we looked into last year with the stories of Heracles in his initiation, the boar has always been in all spiritual societies. It has been the emblem of wisdom. Wisdom made manifest in matter. Not wisdom in its subtle sense, which is the serpent which surrounds things and it incubates them like the Orphic egg, but the divine spiritual wisdom that enters into matter and becomes realized in matter, in a way very similar to why Rudolf Steiner claims that pigs are the growth of a pig represents the manifestation of cosmic wisdom, and that would include hippopotami, all of those creatures that have spiral tails, that are tiny tails, so that all of the spiritual energy goes into the production of flesh. And so this represents wisdom that is becoming manifest within the forms. And the raising of the earth on the boar, the tusk of the boar or the mane of a lion or a horse or the antlers of a deer all represent direct manifest creative energy. And that creative energy associated with the third member, which we'll be talking about 2 weeks from tonight, is the generative principle. But the wisdom principle, when it is entering into form and matter itself and bringing it into being and bringing it out of a cosmic ocean, is what the boar incarnation is all about. It's really interesting in all of this, the description of Vishnu. This is, as we know when we talked about the Orphics last year, the 3 levels of being are creation, and as we've seen tonight, emanation, and finally fabrication. The highest order of the divine and the divine being to all mystery schools, especially the Platonists, was creators. The emanation, which is associated with the light out of which all things are made, is associated with the second level of creators and with the second being within ourselves. And here we see, I go back to the passage, but I don't want to spend too much time. The emanation is not only an external emanation, but it is an internal emanation into itself. In the same way that the imagination imagines and draws out of itself, it emanates light into itself. And this emanation of light, the self-illumination, the self-enlightenment, is the means or the modus operandi of how the imagination works in producing forms. This works not only in the divine creation at the highest level, whereby all of the realms are produced, it actually works in our own visualizations. I don't know how much visualization you've ever practiced, but if you try to imagine an object and see it from the outside as a thing, if you try to visualize in that way, it's very difficult to keep the thing within a given size and to keep it from jumping away or blowing all over the place. But if you're trying to visualize a thing, if you visualize an object as light and that the light condenses, therefore, if we wish to visualize an object, no matter how material and tangible or how indefinite and flexible, by seeing light first and condensing the light by emanating it onto itself, is the way that forms are best developed. So we have again the whole principle of sacrifice. This time it is a sacrifice at the beginning of an age rather than a sacrifice at the end of an age. And so we see that it works both ways in time as well as both ways in space. It works back, saving things back to their germ or building things out of their germ. And we have the 2 twos again and the whole paradox of it. We have a perpetual sacrifice. I don't know that I want to carry on too much longer. because I can see people are getting tired, and I don't blame them. What I have done is I've brought a poetic version of, it's an ancient book. It's out of the Mahabharata, which is one of the long mythical books, which is a later recap of early mythology. It's about a divine war that takes place. And in the middle of this, at the scene of the great battle, the hero Arjuna has entered upon the battlefield. And he has the incarnation of Vishnu as his charioteer. And it is Vishnu incarnated as Krishna. And Arjuna is timid about going into battle. And in the Bhagavad Gita, the Blessed Lord song, or the song celestial, or the heavenly song, is the dialogue between Arjuna and Vishnu Krishna, with Krishna urging him to act and to do his duty as he is called upon. And I want to give you a sense or a flavor of the spiritual or the religious form that has come out of these stories, going all the way back to the Vedas. And I want to talk about some of the, I'll just mention some of the attributes of that go along with it. This is Krishna speaking, and he says, "Thou grievest where no grief should be. Thou speakest words lacking wisdom. For the wise in heart mourn not for those that live, nor for those that die. Nor I, nor thou, nor any of these ever was not, nor ever will be not. Forever and forever afterwards, all that doth live, lives always. To man's frame there comes an infancy, and youth in age. So come their raisings up and layings down of other and other life abodes, which the wise know and fear not. This that irks thy sense life, thrilling to the elements, bringing the heat and cold, sorrows and joy, 'tis brief and mutable. Bear with it, prince, as the wise bear. The soul which is not moved, that soul that with a strong and constant calm takes sorrow and takes joy indifferently, lives in the life undying. That which is can never cease to be, and that which is not will not exist. To see this truth of both, is theirs who part essence from accident, substance from shadow. Indestructible, learn thou, life is, spreading life through all. It cannot anywhere, by any means, by any wise diminished, stayed, or changed. But for these fleeting frames which it informs with death, spirit deathless, endless, infinite, they perish. Let them perish, prince, and fight. He who shall say, Lo, I have slain a man, and he who shall think, Lo, I am slain, those both know not. Life cannot slay. Life is not slain. Never the spirit was born, the spirit shall cease to be never. Never was time, it was not. End and beginning are dreams. Birthless and deathless and changeless remaineth the spirit forever. Death hath not touched it at all, dead though the house of it seems. Who knoweth it exhaustless, self-sustained, immortal, indestructible, shall say, I have killed a man, or caused to kill. Nay, but as when one layeth his worn-out robes away, and taketh new ones, saith, These will I wear today. So putteth by the Spirit lightly its garb of flesh, and passeth to inherit a residence afresh. I could go on, but you get the pretty much the idea of. I have a whole bunch of readings in here, but I'm going to pass on them all because I got too greedy and tried to say too many things. But I really recommend this version. It's written by Edward Arnold, who had a great appreciation both of good poetry and of Hindu philosophy. Eventually I'll have some more in the store. When that great time comes when I start buying books again. But I really recommend it because it is, as a scripture, it is beautiful. And it carries all of the spirit of Vishnu, as we've been talking about it tonight, very, very clearly. I want to look just a little bit at some of the prosaic symbolism of Vishnu to show how this is manifest in a very material way. Vishnu is called the Redeemer, and in terms of elements, is associated with water. The element of water. We're going to talk about hierarchies of elements as time goes on, and to some extent the element of air. And the whole quality of water engendering life in things and things growing in the life of water, the whole ability to precipitate and to evaporate, that quality is why the nature of Vishnu is associated with water. It is the precipitator of the visible, and it is also the volatile, much more volatile. Remember, we said Brahma was associated with earth because Brahma was will that, as subtle as it was everywhere so much all at the same time. It was as solid as earth. Vishnu is associated with the mother of life and with the permeability of wisdom. Remember, we said that Brahma had a vahan or vehicle in the goose or in the swan that laid the golden egg. Well, Vishnu has as his vahan or vehicle the Garuda bird. And the Garuda bird is an immense eagle, but it's an eagle that has a red beak and green wings. I would go a little bit more into that, but it's a little too far away. It is a much more active bird. It isn't a floating bird. It isn't the bird of subtlety that simply churns the water. It is much more active. His Viraj or female counterpart is Lakshmi. And Lakshmi is the goddess of extreme protectivity and extreme good fortune. Maybe we'll talk about feminine counterparts. The tools or the emblems that he always carries with him, one of them is the chank, which is the conch shell, which beautifully shows again the progressive expansion and the progressive accretion of the form of life as life itself expands. So in all the pictures of Vishnu, you almost always find him carrying a conch shell. Sometimes they're very stylized. Another one of the vehicles of Vishnu is the chakra, which is sometimes seen as just a disc. Sometimes it's seen as a disc with blades on it as a very destructive tool. But in any case, it is the whole idea of something that is circular and spirals back on itself, because a pole that is in perpetual life, in the division, in the paradox of polarity that is constantly turning on itself, is like a wheel. It's a life that has no beginning or no end. It just circulates and it just lives. In another sense, we know that the life spirit, or the second attribute of the Trinity, when it is focused into matter, is focused as the etheric vehicle, and the expression of life or vitality in the etheric vehicle is found in circulating centers that are also called chakras, but we won't go into all of that. Sometimes the bull is carried by Vishnu, which would mean that in the threefold circle that Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva would be associated with the three simplest elements of symbology, the circle, the semicircle, and the cross. And sometimes Vishnu carries a duodent, which is something like this is a trident, like Neptune carries. Yeah. Vishnu carries a duodent, and emblematic again of the two, or of the soul principle of the medium. When we come to Shiv, we'll see the relationship of the first and the third, and the relationship of the second comes more clear. And hopefully we'll have something of the divine that we can put into words somehow. Sometimes Vishnu wears perpetually flowering necklaces. He wears long necklaces of flowers that are always coming to life. And sometimes he carries a club that is like a closed lotus, and it is like it's a stylized bulb. It's called a gadha. And it's again not so much the idea of a club as the perpetual flowering, perpetual bursting open. He usually lies as Narayana on the bed of a lotus, and sometimes on a seven-headed serpent. And Vishnu has 1,000 names, which I don't know all of, but I'll give you a few of the attributive ones. We've talked about them already. The form of everything, the sacrifice, the altar, the expander, the Lord of the senses, that's through the etheric, obviously, the exciter of man, the drum resonator. I wanted to take a little side trip on the sound of the original word from the Manu story, but I'm from the boar story, but it was a little too much. I feel kind of ridiculous. I've been thinking to myself all week how cheeky it is to try to talk about the nature of God. But I hope that you forgive my boldness, and I hope that some of the ideas point to something in your meditations or your prayers or whatever, because I'm trying to do something that I realize is rather a silly thing to do. But when we have some idea of the ultimate focus of consciousness that we are all reaching toward, then we can talk about the things in between the hierarchy of consciousness and do so a little bit better, I hope. So 2 weeks from now we'll talk about Shiv, and then we'll talk about hierarchy.